Welcome back to Ryan Runs. I am Ryan. I am sitting, but there's still been a lot of movement around these parts as of late. Just by way of housekeeping, you might have noticed that the Facebook thing is up, Instagram maybe by now as well, who knows. You might not ever go there. I've heard people do that with Facebook, so to each his own, but for now, I continue to try and grow, hopefully beyond even this space and this backdrop at some point. In fact, why don't I ever just put something on the green screen? That's probably why. So maybe the biggest announcement, though, is what ended up becoming of that other video series idea that I said I had. All I knew was that I was going to go through some of my old comic book cards. I did a bit on Instagram not too long ago on my personal account, where I went through my comic book box for the first time in I don't know how many years, and it was fun kind of reminiscing and looking stuff up. But I never did that with my comic book cards. So I kind of always meant to, and again, originally thought that I could do a video series where I just opened them up and talked about them, much like I did with some of those comics. But literally by time I was done with that video, this all happened within the space of editing that small video I thought I was going to do. It turned into a trailer for an entire season, and I guess multiple seasons, of a show that I came to call Chasers, which inside baseball, I guess, the more I looked up stuff about the cards, the more I heard about the chase cards, of course. So I thought this series could be something of a collectible corner, which might be a better title already. No, that one's taken for sure, right? Somebody's using that one. Just a place where I can showcase different collectibles, different stories from my life along those lines. And it's growing by leaps and bounds. Let me tell you, this idea I have for the first episode now is going to have me shooting on location at a couple spots in my old hometown, which is still pretty close. So it's not that big of a deal, but still, it's I hope not growing too much larger than that already. Big ideas. Already got big ideas for small videos. That's the tagline. So keep an eye on the YouTube. That won't come out as a podcast, so that's strictly a YouTube series. Although, again, I started calling it season 1 until I found out that you can't actually label things by season on YouTube unless you're some sort of partner person, which, gathering by my 6 subscribers, I think I am not. But I suppose if I want to do something with this, that would help. So there's my pitch. All of my other pitches are games this week, and one of them is a follow-up from last week's, I believe that was last week's show, where I talked about a couple mobile games that I've been playing for quite a while. This is another that I left out of that list that it's not going to take more than a couple minutes to talk about, but I figured I might as well because it is also a large part of why I have been playing those other 2 games less, even though I've fallen off Dr. Mario World now completely because I did end up getting 3 stars on every level, including the bonus levels. So game complete, I guess. But DC Legends, certainly I fell off a bit because, in fact, going even farther back, me and my wife have had a kind of rolling game of Scrabble going for probably over a decade at this point, honestly. We're coming up on 20 years married, in fact, this next year. So it's not that long, right? We've still got plenty of time. And what ended up happening with that app, that official Scrabble app, is that it fell into disuse because it fell into underdevelopment. The thing was always very poorly tended to. It has the EA name on it, but I can't imagine that's, EA proper or any type of, I don't know. Whoever was doing it didn't really care if people cared about it. So we fell off it just because it worked so poorly and was so poorly supported. But fell back on to the crossword puzzle craze, I guess. And this happened fairly recently in COVID, I would say, during COVID. So, cooped up and all that, looking for something to occupy the time between ourselves. And the just straight up New York Times crossword puzzle app was that thing. And yes, I believe you do need to subscribe $40 a year, something like that. So it's not exactly cheap. It's not bad, especially if that's what you're into. And in fact, I want to say I initially subscribed because I wanted access to the spelling bee portion, which is another fun game. But fell into the crossword stuff because it became something that me and my wife could do together, much like we did those Scrabble puzzles. So it's just to say that, I mean, the app is no nonsense. I wouldn't call it bare bones, but it is focused. There are many features that are, I think, great additions, especially if you're going to get into crossword puzzles and going to get into hard crossword puzzles. In fact, the one thing they maybe don't mention is that, I mean, you'll know this. This is going to be very obvious in the New York Times. Crossword has been around forever. In fact, there's an archive on that app that goes as far back as '93, I want to say, or something. So that's just digital. But it doesn't say anywhere that the puzzles get progressively harder during the week. I believe how it goes is Monday is the easiest, and then Saturday is the hardest, and then as it gets to Sunday, that's the biggest, so the difficulty is a little lower, even if the entire thing is not as difficult as like Saturdays or something like that. So we didn't know that, and I think the first one we tried was on Saturday or Sunday, so we almost fell off completely until I think my wife just Googled it and was like, oh, and then sure enough, Mondays, I think we can complete on our own pretty regularly. Tuesdays also. Wednesday, we usually need to help each other, which is where it gets fun. You know, we kind of pool our resources, our talents, our smarts, and to get through those ones. I don't know that we've ever been able to succeed at a Saturday that way. I don't remember. But the app itself has plenty of helps if you can't. You can check certain clues to see if you're right. You can check an entire puzzle. You can turn on auto check, so it's just automatically telling you if something's wrong. And you can still have plenty of fun that way. I'm trying to get a streak going, because that's the other thing it does, is if you complete puzzles in a row daily, you will get a streak going. So I've gotten that streak going Monday through like Thursday, maybe even Friday, and just always lost it Saturday, Sunday. So that's kind of the meta there that you can create for yourself, that I've created for myself, is trying to get that streak. But it's fun, man. Crosswords are fun. Who knew? Check out that app. Didn't mention it last time, probably should have, but worth a shot. The other game I want to talk about is one that's been on the list forever. I finished playing it probably months ago at this point, and wanted to talk about it at that point because when I had finally started it, I could not stop. It was just impossible. It was one of those games that occupies your every thinking moment. When are you going to get back to playing it? But before I get too deep into that, I should start with my history with Remedy games, which I'm a big Remedy fan, but I feel like I came in pretty late. I played Max Payne 1 and 2 at the same time, like downloaded them both for my Mac laptop. I think it was in college, and honestly, I have a hard time for that reason separating both of those games. I know one of them has that weird dream sequence thing where you're walking around, but really I was like, oh, bullet time, and then, whatever. Liked the games, definitely liked the pulp aspect to them as well, but I don't think I even knew it was a Remedy game necessarily at that point. That didn't come until Alan Wake, which I also liked, and Quantum Break most recently, which I also liked. I hesitate to tell people sometimes. I know it was kind of this grand experiment, especially whereas Microsoft was kind of tooling around with some of that different cross-media stuff. And Remedy had it in their blood, the Max Payne was halfway a comic book or a pulp novel. Alan Wake had that TV show that kind of played in the middle that occupied the fabric of that universe. Quantum Break went even farther. It had literal TV inserts that had to do, and there was a branching narrative, blah, blah, etc. Those TV inserts, the production was fine. In fact, the production value, that might be the wrong way to come at it. I want to say the production value was actually pretty good. It was just the writing and some of the ways it matched up didn't always click. I still enjoyed it. Again, I'm probably biased, but I feel like I have a healthy suspension. I can kind of be like, yeah, well, that wasn't this, but look what they're trying to do, and kind of got into it that way. And regardless, I think the gameplay was pretty darn solid and all that stuff. So I liked Quantum Break, whatever. We don't have to talk about that. Control is by far the best game Remedy's ever done. I think I've heard that from other people before, but I'll echo that. It is, of all of those, just the most amazing thing. And it's for several reasons. I think it's the best playing game. I think it's also just the best world they've ever created. And when all of those things click, you do get lost. And I've heard lots of comparisons to X-Files, it's like Remedy does X-Files. Sure, it's better than that. X-Files obviously had some issues with some of those later seasons, or even just deciding what that narrative or mythos was from time to time. And I like X-Files quite a bit, but this is a complete package. I don't even want to start, because the more I get into it, the less sense it's going to make. There's something called the oldest house, which has been taken over or adopted, might be a better word, or even just was adopted by. Who adopted who? The Federal Bureau of Control, which is, kind of like it sounds, an FBI, a paranormal FBI thing. So you are Jesse Faden, this girl who comes in, has been called kind of by a voice. You walk in, and you'll see this in the footage. I did a little bit of the very beginning of the game, and then I did a bunch of mine, which is complete end game. In fact, everything's completed. I was just running around to rooms I've already been in. But she becomes director. Basically, it's that, her coming to terms with her new calling as she fights an invading force, because the oldest house nobody understands real well. There's a number of things it does to people, can do to people, gateways it opens, it does stuff to items and objects, objects of power. Some of these you're cleansing. The objects do different things or will respond in different ways. You bind some of those objects to yourself, and that's what gives you superpowers, which, for all of the gameplay goodness, I'm surprised they pull off those superpowers. Like, you can straight up fly, and it's limited, but I feel like that's a thing that breaks a lot of games, especially third-person shooters. I can't think of one third-person shooter that's done flying real well. It hasn't made me feel like, I'm bumping off of invisible walls or something like that to some extent. They solved that by being inside the oldest house throughout the game, so that's one way. But the oldest house itself is top tier writing, world design, environment. There's a moment at the beginning where it kind of explains that it changes as you walk through it. The pathways won't be there that were there before. So the very beginning of the game, which I probably talked about this on Zero Hit Points. In fact, I want to say I made it one of my favorite games of that year, even though I only played about an hour or two into it. When I went back to the game this time, I was like, well, I got to start over. And then it turns out I got to where I was in one playthrough. So I don't know if I need to start over. But at first I was a little concerned, because I was like, oh, all right, I'm going to get lost, or I'm going to miss a collectible. Oh no. And basically what they do is it does shift a little bit, especially in the beginning is kind of a fun little trick. And I feel like I read this somewhere. They figured out at some point that doesn't make for great exploration. It doesn't necessarily make for great world building, because you can become frustrated because you don't know where you are or how to get back to where you were, which is what I was afraid of. So I think what they ended up doing, and I haven't read anything about this is just me flying off, I'm pretty sure the come between was that they experiment with kind of asymmetrical level design, because a lot of games are made to funnel you through certain areas, and there's the exploration aspect where you are very purposely going off the beaten path. But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of tricks. I feel like I heard about this with BioShock most often, because there is so much to look at, but they wanted you to still know where you were going. So a lot of games do that. Obviously, it's probably game design 101. So Remedy now has to experiment with a way to still do that. I'm sure they don't want you getting lost in their game necessarily, but in a way that has you going through some truly non-traditional environment design, it feels like, to me. The doors are in weird spots behind weird things, and there's still only one way out, so it's not like you're having to even figure out the map all that much. Sometimes you are, obviously, but for the most part, it's not confusing, but it is different. It does make you take notice. I think that's what was going on. I could be wrong. Either way, everything came together. The enemies, the gameplay, just you're picking up what are they, like memos, because it is still a bureaucracy, you know, it's a paranormal bureaucracy to some extent, but even they don't know exactly what's going on. The main storyline, I won't ruin, but there's a scientist experimenting. That's probably what brings in the bad guys, to what extent and why. And if you played through Alan Wake to the end and still after it ended wasn't sure how it ended, I think this is a little better than that, even if it does feel a little bit not unfinished but dangling, but in a good way, you know, like in the way those X-Files episodes would sometimes. You know, the purpose wasn't to get to the end and tie everything up with a bow. It was either to leave you with an unsettling feeling or even questions, or, you know, I like that very much, and it's done perfectly here as well. So just a lot to recommend. I dipped into the DLC, which one of them is called the Alan Wake Experience, because the initials are the same as the altered world events that happen in the game. That's when this other, I think it's the astral plane is the name of kind of the universe or the dimension that's colliding with ours by way of the old house or whatnot, because some of these altered items will show up in the real world. The Bureau of Control is tasked with going to search those out and bring them in and all that stuff, so that's part of their job. But oftentimes an entire city will be taken by an event or something like this, so there's lots of recreations of those events and you're kind of piecing a mystery together while you go. So the Alan Wake Experience DLC, the AWE DLC, I believe essentially tries to tie up some of those loose ends with Alan Wake by making them in-universe, by making them altered world events. You know, all of the weird horror stuff that was going on was, you know, oldest house stuff or astral plane stuff. And it's cool. I like how that's all tied together, but that's almost it. It's kind of sad in a way. It's you get some cutscenes with Alan Wake. He gets some of his cool lines. Like it's like you're back in that game to some extent, but I don't know. It didn't satisfy in the way I was really hoping it would as an Alan Wake fan. So that was strange in a way, but still good and is more Control. I would actually recommend the other DLC more, which I think was called the Foundation or just Foundation DLC. And that one, you literally go down to the foundation of the oldest house and you are, again, solving something of a mystery there. There's some world deformation that begins to happen that you take control over at some point, so you're given new powers and stuff like that. So also the look, if you've already seen the footage, because I know a lot of times the footage won't line up with what I'm talking about, it's the whole red and black, or red and you're like going through rocks and tunnels and stuff like that. Just fantastic. The whole game looks, if I haven't mentioned that yet, just beautiful. It's the best looking game Remedy's ever done also, which if you didn't like their past stuff, you got to at least admit, you know, like Alan Wake detractors, sure, I could see why people wouldn't like that game. In fact, I can see why people wouldn't attach to Remedy games, but you got to admit they look great. Why they might not attach is because they're very linear and they're very writerly, if that's a thing. They are consummate authors. You know, their content is very unique and comes with a signature, it seems. I feel like I would be hard pressed to not recognize a Remedy game if I was playing one. So it's part of what you come to love, what you come to attach to. So if you're not into that author, I imagine you're not into that game, so, or that developer or whatever. So Control, old news again probably, but still probably one of the newer games I've ever talked about. So hey, give me some credit and go play Control. That would be my advice. I think that's all I got for this week. Like I said, and hopefully going to be working on that other series and hope to drop that first episode this week. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll talk to you later.